Welcome to part 4 of my series of tutorials about how I make models in Gmax and export them into the Trainz railway simulator. So for this session we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. In the past we've looked at making things using standard primitives here in the top left, and this includes mainly I've been using a box, but you could also use a sphere or cylinder, tube, torus. Never made a teapot. So this time we're going to create something, and we're going to be in the in this top left area, this top left button, but instead of selecting geometry and standard primitives, we're going to select this next one, which is called shapes. So we click on that, and the shapes that we've got are a line, a circle, an arc, not a clue what that is, engon, could be anything, text, I've never used it, rectangle, ellipse, donut, star, helix. I very rarely use those. The most useful one that I've found is, the ones that I've found are a rectangle and a circle, and these are producing essentially two-dimensional meshes. So if we try with the rectangle, and for this one I'm not going to be using the perspective window down here on the bottom right. Instead I'm going to use our button right down on the bottom right here, which just moves whichever window is active. This one is active because it's got that highlight bar around it, to full screen. So the one I'm going to select is left. You can see the highlighting has changed. So I'm going to come down here to the bottom right and use this button down here, which is the minimum maximum toggle, toggles between the two, one or the other, and we make it maximum. So here's the left window, maximum, and we'll click on rectangle and we'll draw a rectangle. Now the reason why I've chosen just the left view is because this is a two-dimensional polygon, a square. So if we go into the perspective view, there it is there. If I rotate it, make this window active and rotate it, you can see there it is that polygon. It's not very clear because it's quite faint because of the colour, and it's already smooth and highlighted. So if we go into wireframe, we see a similar wireframe to if we were looking at part of a box, but in smooth and highlight we just see virtually the same thing, with the bounding box though to show that it's a mesh, an object, and it's in that colour. Now we've selected it, and it's not a very good colour to see in the perspective box. So one of the most useful things to do is to go over to the left here, because it's taken us, we've got various attributes over here of whatever we're looking at, and one of them is name and colour. And if you get really into this and you want to make everything, give a name to everything, to identify it so you know which part of a model you're making, then you can rename it here. You can just highlight that and rename it. But I'm not going to bother doing that. I used to do that when I started off, and then I just gave up because I was just making so many rectangles or squares I just couldn't think of new names. But here, if you click on here, this little square of colour should come up. Where are we? There we are. And it's got object colour, and at the moment you can see the one that's highlighted here. So you've got a range of basic colours, and you can add custom colours if you want to. These are useful for distinguishing different parts of your mesh as you're making it. It has no effect whatsoever on the output. It's simply the colour of the mesh before you apply the texture, and it remains the colour of the mesh that you'll see whenever you look in wireframe mode. So let's make it a bit brighter to contrast with the grid and the basis. So make it yellow. Yeah, make it yellow, why not? Click on OK, and there you are, look, it's yellow. Now the problem with that is, of course, yellow is used when we texture things to identify which face you're texturing. So maybe we should have it some other colour. Well, let's make it red. Okay, at least it stands out a bit more. Okay, but that's not the window that I was saying that we want to look at. This is the window over here, left. So we'll maximise that using the toggle down in the bottom right here to make it nice and big, and you can see we've got a square, a rectangle rather than a square. Square would be square. And if we go back up to here, so instead of making another original mesh, we're going to go over to the modify, and we can see here we've got our rectangle and we've got a number of options there of things we can do to it, and we've also got the usual parameters here, its length, width and corner radius. So we'll have a look at that in a minute, but first of all then let's get this down to a size which might be more useful to us. So we'll say 50 feet as the in fact it's the height. And instead of 556 feet in the width, we'll take it down to 30 feet. And just like anything else, we can go up to the select and move, and we can come over here and we see there's x, y, z coordinates. So let's change the y coordinate to 0 and the z coordinate to 0, and that just centers it on our vertical grid. Remember, it's vertical because we're looking in the left view, not looking down onto it, we're looking at it from one side. If we go back here and toggle our views, you'll see that the view from the left is the one we've just been looking at. There it is. But if we go up to this window which shows the top down view, and we select it and zoom in, I'm using the mouse wheel for that, you see it's got no width at all. It's simply there's no third dimension there. And if we look at it from the front, which means we're looking at it from the 90 degrees from the left, it means it also has no width. So it's just a mesh square that has no real substance as far as a 3D model is concerned. Okay, and it's the centerpiece that's been centered down onto the z-axis. So if we come back over here and where we're editing it and just remind ourselves the size of it, the width is 30, but the height or length is 50 feet or 49 foot 12 inches. So really what we want to do is to move that center. We want to, sorry, not move the center, move the whole rectangle just up, so the bottom line of the rectangle is on the 0 of the z. So because it's 50 feet, we want to move it up 25 foot 6. Oh goodness me, 25 feet. Honestly, must be I haven't had enough coffee. Right, so there we are, 25 feet. And let's highlight, we've got this height window highlighted left, so let's make that the biggest one. Now let's have a look at this rectangle. Well, there's no subdivisions here, there's no little plus sign that has to make anything most of it. And actually, once you got it to that, once you created your basic shape, either a rectangle or a circle, an ellipse or text or a star, there's not much more you can do with it apart from resizing it using the parameters. I mean, on the star one you can change the number of points, things like that. The circle, obviously you change the radius to increase its size. But just like that, it's not really much use to us. It's not going to do anything. So what we have to do is we need to edit the mesh. That's a mesh. So ideally what we want to do is convert this into a form of mesh which will be the most flexible for us. And you come over to rectangle and you right click on rectangle to bring up that little sub menu which I've shown before. And the one you want to choose is to make an editable spline. Okay, and it converts it from being a simple rectangle into an editable spline, which is a sort of really handy beast to use. And if we click on the plus sign there, we see that we can look at vertices, and we've got 4 vertices that make up the editable spline. We've got segments, and that's a segment, that's a segment, and that is a segment, and that's the 4th segment that make it this up. And then we've got the spline itself, which is the whole thing, but we're interested in using vertex and segment. Okay, right, so there's our editable spline. We can do things with it now, and we know we can do things with it because if we choose one vertex like that, this is using the select and move, and then we've got x and y coordinates highlighted, so that means we can move this way and this way. But if we only want to move one way, we'll just have the x coordinate. I've gone up here to the x button up the top here to choose the coordinate, and I hover the mouse over the point until it's just showing the X. There it's flicking between X and Y, and that's really one of the annoying things in Gmax. It can, even though you've got X selected there, it can flick backwards and forwards between them, and you can go all over the place with it. So make sure you've got X highlighted there. There we go. Now what's it done? Well, it's not acting as the basic standard primitive acts. It's actually acting like a vector drawing in a 2D drawing program. In other words, it's trying to maintain the line between these two. And if you're used to a vector drawing program, a 2D vector drawing program, then these strange little things sticking out here will be familiar to you, because what they do is they affect the angle at which this line leaves that point, or this line leaves that point. So it's actually affecting that point. And the same is true if we come down to here, and it'll affect that point there. So just by highlighting that point, you look at this one, there they are, look, they're in line with the mesh, and that one, we've got these little handles for. And so if we wanted a nice smooth straight line there, instead of this rather oddly curving line, what we'd need to do is, in the with the x-axis highlighted, we grab the handle, move it over, so it's more or less pointing at the other one. Come up to here, to this one, make sure you got the x, the x highlighted, and swing that over there, and it will jump. Give it a moment. Jump, jump, jump. There you are, you can see it flick there. It's just flicked over. So if we move that over to there, and that one's not quite right, so we can move that over to there, and it's a straight line as far as Gmax is concerned. And if we were to continue moving this one, then it would go out of true. But the closer we get to that, it will flick, jump, snap, whatever. Okay, so we can make that that shape. Brilliant, you say. So what? How does that help us? Well, it helps us because these two-dimensional vector style meshes are very powerful, because once we've created the outline or the basics of a shape that we want, we can then turn them into a three-dimensional object. So how are we going to do that? That's what we're going to do next. So let's make sure we know where the position of that one is, from there, from the center to there, and it's 15 feet, because this is the 30-foot dimension, that was the 50-foot dimension. So if we highlight this one, and it says 63 feet, 8.933 inches, we'll just highlight that one and change it to 15 feet. Ugh, look at that, what a mess, even though that one is directly below that one. So just as we made a change with that one, bring that one back, that handle back until it's vertical, and the same is true with this one, and it'll jump again, it'll snap eventually. There you go, it just snapped. See, there's a slight change there, and there, so we know we've got those vertical. So it's not just a case that we've got that point and that point at the correct distance, but we've got the line that joins them all the way along it is the correct distance from the middle. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit clever, hopefully. So we've got our spline highlighted. We're going to come up to edit, right up the top here, top left, edit. Click on the edit, and you can't use Control-C, Control-V in Gmax, you know, the copy something and paste a copy. You have to use the clone function, that's the only way it works. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to clone this to make a second copy of this in exactly the same place. So we just click on clone, and it says, do you want a copy? Don't worry about instance and reference, don't worry about name, you just want a copy. I've tried to get rid of this options that display in the past, got nowhere. Click on OK, and we've got two there now. Or have we? Well, it certainly doesn't look like it, but if we use the X coordinate, we've got one of them highlighted. In fact, we've got the clone highlighted, and we grab it with our select and move. There we are. We got two of the beasties, both coloured red. So what we can do here is we can now reduce this in size, and we'll try a different tool this time. We'll go up to the scale tool, select and uniform scale, that where it shows it with the same proportion of square inside a bigger square, it means it's going to shrink it down in proportion. But if we want to change that and shrink it down in a different way, we can choose this option, which will shrink it down in only one direction, and the direction is determined by which coordinate system you use. For example, if we were to use X coordinate, and we've got our tool highlighted here, our scale tool, and we hold the left mouse button down and pull it over, it's beginning to shrink. Okay, and if we have then choose the Y one, and we grab the object with our tool and it shrinks. Okay, so what? Well, the proportion which it shrinks in any direction is picked up here in these measurements. So what we could do is we could do it to 50%, and this one down from 81 down to 50%. So I know it's in proportion to this one, but if we wanted to, we could change that one to 40%. Okay, and imagine that's going to be a tall window in our wall. We're making a wall, let's say. So select and move, bring it along, and center it up. Where's the center? Oh, not quite sure. So remember what we did before. With this one selected that we want to have centered on the bigger one, come up here to the Align tool, click on Align, and click on, you see the cursor changes when you can hover it over something that you can align this one to. You can't align it to yourself, even though it comes up with a silly cursor change. That's another joy of Gmax. Click on the other object and you get this one which we've seen before, the Align selection. Just go X, Y, Z, and it'll center it. It'll center its axis, its center point, with this one's center point. So let's say that that's a wall with an enormous window, like an industrial wall with a big industrial window, and we're going to put a window set back into the wall some distance from it. So we want to make the wall 3D, and I'm just going to change the color. See, once we're in editing, we can continue to change the color. It's up here now, so if we click on that, and I'm just going to change the color to green, that very pale green. Okay, and that's just so that the next stage becomes obvious, because I'm going to click on the outer one. That's the one I've got selected now, and I'm going to come over here to all of its editable elements and I'm going to click on Attach down here on over to the left. Click on Attach, and then I'm going to come over, and it will change, the cursor will change when it finds something which isn't attached. There you go, and it's changed to this really weird looking tool, and if I click on that, the colour of that now becomes highlighted as well. So we don't need any more. That's a toggle, so you need to turn that off when you've finished using it, the attach key, otherwise you find yourself attaching all sorts of things together. Turn that off. Now if I click away, it should be, it's gone from that pale green back to the red, because now it's part of this mesh. It's now joined in as part of this mesh. So what? Okay, big deal. Let's go back to toggle our screen. So there's our perspective screen. Okay, so we just move that around, and I'll make it full screen, bottom right. There we are. So now we're looking at our mesh. And if we were to export that to Trainz, you just get an error message, because there's nothing there as far as Trainz is concerned. There's neither a texture, nor is there any face, nor there are any faces. It's just an editable spline. But now we're going to do something really nifty, and that's come up to the. We're in editing. We're editing this because we've got it selected, and we come up to this one, Extrude. It's really excellent tool, and we're going to click on Extrude, and as I click on it, watch the object. Ooh. What it's done is it's given it depth, if you like, but it's a depth of 0, but nevertheless it means that it has now two faces. but they're both at 0, so that's no good. If we want a wall and we're going to put a window in there, now nice big industrial wall, probably have a window about a foot set back, so we want a depth in there between these two faces of about a foot. And that's exactly what we do. We come over to here where the parameters are set for the extrude function, and it's 0 at the moment, so we're just going to change that to 1 foot and then press enter, and there we are. We have got, from our mesh, we've now got a wall which is a foot thick, and if we wanted to, I'm not going to do it, but if we wanted to, we could bring a texture of brickwork and texture, just like we did with the box with the planks, we could texture that wall. But because it's 50 feet high, remember, you've got to really tile the bricks all the way along, depending on the size of your texture, get a proper effect, and that's where you can fall into the trap of it making it look like some sort of tartan effect, you know, repeating tiles. So your textures are really important. But that shows you how useful this second type of meshes, splines, how useful it really is. For example, let's do another one quickly. I'm just going to nip through this pretty quickly. Circle. I'm going to draw a circle. There we are. It's drawing it on the, what I always think of as the floor, because it's 0. It's an awful colour to try and see. So let's change the colour to blue to give it a nice one. And now I'm going to edit it. So I come up to the modify one. Here it is, the circle. Can't do much else with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to an editable spline. Always go for editable spline rather than editable mesh, by the way. It's more flexible. Editable spline. And if we look at the contents of the spline up here in our editing, we can see there are vertices. In fact, there are 4 vertices. There are segments. There are 4 segments. And it's a spline itself. But I'm not even going to alter that. Although if I wanted to, I suppose I could just go on, grab one of these, change from X highlighted to Y highlighted. I've got modify and select on, so I'm just going to grab it and just stretch it out. And once I've done that, finished editing it, I'm then going to go up here and I'm going to extrude it. There we are. And I've extruded it a foot, but if I wanted to, I could extrude it 20 feet. And because it's an editable spline, it's very flexible indeed, because if we look at it now in wireframe, what it's done is, as it's extruded it, it has materially changed the nature of the mesh. So if we look at vertices, it suddenly jumps away, because we're only looking at a part of the original spline. This menu over here on the left, the editing menu, you build up a stack of commands that you've applied to your mesh, and if you start trying to edit below your latest command, it'll distort whatever that command then does, the next one up does, or all of the others above it if there's a whole load of them. So if I click back onto extrude, it's just showing us what we've extruded. But if I wanted to alter this a little bit more, but it was more or less okay, but I wanted to, say, bring some of these points out a little bit because it's making some sort of flange or whatever, I come back over to my editing and I go back with the right click and I collapse everything down. First of all to a mesh, do it again, and now this time you collapse it to an editable polygon, which we've met before. And if I click on here and we see the vertices, that's what our editable spline is now been developed into. And if we highlight some of these and I use select and move, and I use the x-axis, there you go, do what you like. If you feel that you can just freehand change it, you go ahead and have a go. But it can be quite it can be both interesting and it can also be very frustrating. You need to keep control of what you're doing, because you can really end up with a mess. So there we are, that's editable splines and extruding. They are combined with those basic primitives, standard primitives. They are most powerful ways of creating the little bits and pieces that go together to make your more complex model. I especially like using them to make walls with spaces for windows and dropping things in. There is an alternative way of doing it, which involves punching a hole through a standard primitive, but oh dear, it makes all sorts of problems. So I prefer this method. It's much more reliable. There's one final aspect I just want to demonstrate just before I finish this one, and I think it's up here under Tools. That is Tools. Display Utilities. Oh, well, there you are. Tools. And it's this one down here, Polygon Counter. Now, if I click on that, it'll just display a little window showing how many polygons. I'm just going to do it there. Okay. So this is the budget. That is how many polygons I can use for each individual object, and this is the total that I can use for any object that I'm going to send out to Trainz, which is why you tend to export animated bogies separately from the body and separately from the front bogies on the locomotive, or the interior is separate. They're all separate models that come together. They're brought together by the config file, the config text file, which you find inside the collection of files that make up a model in Trainz. But this is important because it shows you how many polygons you're using. Because you're creating a model for Trainz, you're having to trade off the model against the textures, against the cost of the text. You don't want something which is going to be megabyte upon megabyte in size. It's really going to knock the performance of Trainz. And although the latest one, Trainz a New Era, can handle really big models, I think that's a bit messy, to be honest. So what you do find is that we've got this mesh selected, and if we look here, it's using 30 polys. This is a polygon count window, and if we look at this one, it's using 32. And trimming away unnecessary polys is quite a laborious task at times, but it's really vital, because every polygon you can save, then you can use it for another part with more detail in your model. So for example, if this was butting against a wall this way and we made another one, in fact let's make another one. So there's that, I've got it highlighted. So we come back up here to Edit, Clone, we make a copy of it, and Modify and Select and Move rather is up here. And that's what we've got selected. So we're just, there we are, we've got another one, and we're going to rotate it, and it's on the Z axis. So remember, we've got down here, make sure we've got our angle set to 5-degree increments, and we rotate it 90 degrees. There we are, it says 90 degrees there where we've rotated it. Back up to Move and Select, or Select and Move, I never remember. And we'll bring it up to there, and then we'll move it to this way. Well, immediately you can see you've got an edge on this new one. You've got an edge there, which is going to be hidden by this wall, and you've got on this wall you've got an edge here, which is going to be hidden by this wall if you butt them up together. So immediately what we can do on this one is we can go up to its Modify, Extrude. Well, we're going to do to this what we did to this, that is convert it, or collapse it down to an editable poly, which incidentally dramatically reduces its actual poly count. And then we're going to select one of the polygons, which is that edge highlighted in red. Okay, let me just, before I do that, let me just change the colour of that so you can see it absolutely clearly what I'm doing. There we are, so that's now a green colour. But it's this one that we're going to alter. We're going to take the polygon of the end and we're just going to delete it. Gone. Now it doesn't look like it's gone, but it is gone. If we were to look in the smooth and highlight section and we were to select this one and move it forward, look, there's a gap. But we've saved polygons because we don't need it there because it's going to be hidden by this wall. So we've saved polygons, now down to 9. And if we're going to put a roof on, there's no point in having that little bit there. So we can go down one more, we can take that polygon out, and it's down to 8. We don't need anything underneath because that's going to be on the ground and hidden. And take that one out, and we can carry on doing this on our model, taking this out. And if you're going to use the same wall to make 4 walls, it's best to do this first and just clone this rather than then go around and do all the others that you've cloned off the same thing. And if we put a window there, but it's not actually, you're not actually going to be able to see through it, it's going to be opaque, although it's going to have the image of a window there. We can turn around and select this polygon and delete it, so it's got no back, as it were. But as far as the model is concerned, that's fine. Once we close that up with a window, texture of a window, then we're now down to 5 polys for one wall, which is brilliant because it's much smaller than this one. To go over here, don't we? Which has got 32. So first of all, we need to reduce that one down to a poly. Editable, we're going to use our collapsal business, and then we're going to edit it, take out the unnecessary polys, and get something less than 1/6 the size, which is always good news in Trainz. And knowing which polygons you can delete is half the battle. Knowing what is going to overlap, what will it become pretty obvious. So use polys with economy. Have a go using those editable splines extruding, and in the next session, which will be section 5, I'm going to show you how to use those splines and the lathe function, which is really scary, but it works lovely most of the time. So that's it for this one. That's it for number 4. And if you have any questions or comments, please do post them, and please do subscribe to my channel, and I hope you've enjoyed doing this one.